Welcome back to the Attack on Titan comparison series. Today we'll cover episode 86, the episode that covers the entirety of chapter 129, and this is arguably MAPPA'S best Attack on Titan episode yet, with some of the most hardcore action this show has ever seen. So let's not waste any more time, let's get right into it. The episode starts off with a 30-second recap until the sound of gunshots brings us into the first page of the chapter with various shots of Armin and Connie as well as their dead friends. These shots are recreated very well with a serene amount of dread. There's even some extra shots here, like the close-up of Connie's gun, which is still pointed at Samuel, as well as the highly detailed shot of Armin's eye. On top of which, Armin actually decides to get up to look at Connie now before we transition into a long shot of the battle behind him. This is the shot that brings us into the awesome 2-page illustration of Reiner and Annie fighting off Jaegerists and dodging thunder spears in the background, as well as the panels of them up close. Now, normally these 2 pages would be the only action we get before moving into Hanji and Magath in the basement, but MAPPA decided that would be a waste, so right at the beginning of the episode, we're hit with some awesome Titan on Soldier SAKUGA. Now, just like in the manga, the anime did technically adapt Annie slapping the building and Reiner punching the building and soldiers, but overall the choreographic vision for this segment is largely in a space of its own, and that's probably for the better, as SAKUGA tends to look better when key animators can go off script and do their own thing. You can tell MAPPA has really upped the ante for this episode, as the 2D art has been put front and center for all those up close and personal shots. Shots that usually end with a Jaegerist getting erased out of existence. It's a great introduction to some of the fantastic SAKUGA we'll be getting later. After this little anime exclusive bit, we move to the Azumabito hidey hole. In here, the crew is getting some bad news about the state of the flying boat, because while they themselves aren't under attack at the moment, they will be if they end up having to wait for a day like the engineers said. Ultimately, it looks like MAPPA has decided to hold off on showing us any footage resembling the rumbling that we might see in the manga. The dialogue now just shows us footage of stuff in the here and now as the engineers hide even deeper in the basement than normal. Guess they just don't take bad news very well. Especially John, who just then remembered his time in Marley with the locals. Fortunately, Kiyomi has an idea of how they can get up and running as soon as possible. Now, normally an imaginary map would appear behind her as she explains her plan, but as it turns out, there's an actual real map in the basement now, which repositions all of our characters there for the remainder of this scene. This map is much more detailed than the one in Kiyomi's head, and there's even another map of Paradise just on the right. Of course, we can't read any of this because it's written in Eldian, but it is nice to have a more detailed look at the world. There are even some lakes and mountain ranges added in now. Now that they're all on the same page, they run back to the staircase where they normally would have been talking the whole time, and we move right along into the opening. After the opening, we continue the Titan killing mayhem with Annie killing some Jaegerists. As you can see, these two have been pretty busy with all the bodies laying around, and this guy right here was just added to the kill count. While Annie doesn't necessarily catch the building with this kick in the anime, we do get to see what became of this guy as he gets kicked into another guy and then dings his head on a metal door. If that guy somehow survives, then he's definitely paralyzed for life. And it's in that same cut that we start following the guy who will try to thunder spear Annie in just a second, as he now springboards off the ground. This guy is pretty nimble as he manages to give Annie the slip a few times before he's taken out by Mikasa, but this time instead of a direct kick to the jaw, he actually gets kicked center mass, prematurely setting off the thunder spear on his arm. This guy does seem to change appearances as the scene switches animation formats, but in motion it's not really noticeable. After that guy gets taken out and Mikasa lands on Annie to inform her of the revised plan, some of her lines afterwards have been cut. See, normally after Mikasa leaves, Annie would ponder the legitimacy of this new plan a little bit, as it could have serious repercussions for her family in Liberio, but she doesn't really have these thoughts in the anime. Not until later, at least. As Magath starts escorting the Azumabito to the boat, we get an anime-exclusive representation of Mikasa now informing Reiner of the plan as well, before adapting the shot of him punching the building in the background. And it's after that when Flock slides in and spots the engineers and commands his men close by to open fire. Men that will ultimately meet the wrath of Mikasa and Hanji. This scene was done a little differently, as not only does Flock no longer make that ugly-ass face, but Mikasa and Hanji chose different targets as well, as they both no longer come from the same direction. It's only after Flock gets over his shock and he actually starts opening fire at the two that they fly around the roof instead of scurrying over it like in the manga. From there we transition back to the engineers who are currently under fire again. In the manga it looks like this guy here is really the only one that was shooting at them and would be Reiner's main incentive to put his arm out to protect the engineers, but in the anime Reiner actually ate this guy as more bullets rain down from elsewhere. You can tell because of the blood now dripping down his face in the next cut. Nice attention to detail, MAPPA. From here Reiner is hit with 3 well-placed thunder spears right next to his nape. Just 2 of them this time though, instead of the normal 3. While he did get pretty screwed up by these attacks, it seems he was fully aware of the existence of these guys, as you can kinda catch a glimpse of him protecting his nape at the very last second. It's this act that prompts Magath to start returning fire, catching 2 extra kills than normal as the engineers continue running forward. Keep in mind I won't always mention extra kills like this, as it goes without saying that we'll be seeing a lot of extra deaths in the anime, but just keep it in mind. For example, deaths like this one as Annie grabs this guy in his unsightly face and yeets him out of the frame. It's incredibly impressive how MAPPA did this scene, as the 2D soldier transitions seamlessly into Annie's 3D model. For one continuous cut, this is really well done. The synergy of these two art forms is really coming full circle this episode. There's basically no disconnect whatsoever, and it doesn't look strange in the slightest. Stuff like this must have taken quite a bit of planning to pull off, especially with how violently the camera rocks back and forth. Ultimately though, these soldiers have no interest in Annie as they send their thunder spears past her and towards the engineers. To counter this, Annie catches these thunder spears with the front of her forearm now instead of the back of it, and we also now see her immediate reaction as it cross-dissolves into her hand falling out of the air. Watching Annie actually protect someone else is something that I never thought I'd see, and I love how MAPPA actually shows her stepping over them now as they retreat to the ship. It might not seem like much, but this anime-exclusive action actually puts her in a position slightly left of the dock now as more thunder spears come flying in, and it almost looks like she didn't really spot them until the very last second this time around as Reiner comes in to save her. Interestingly enough, it looks like Reiner has already taken some more thunder spears off screen, as there seems to be a few new holes near the collarbone area that didn't exist in the manga. But either way, he's about to take damage much more severe than that, as he basically becomes a human shield for Annie as the attacks go on. Now, FALCO is watching all of this happen, but he appears noticeably more mobile this time as he flies past his comrades while getting his thoughts in order. It's only after he finishes his anime-exclusive flyby that we transition over to the cart titan carrying the rest of our crew by a literal thread. Peak seems to be a little more stealthy during this part now, as she mostly stays in between these two buildings and doesn't venture out much anymore, as FALCO says he wants to fight too. But as we all know, there's no stopping this boy, as the cut of Annie's arm falling to the ground brings FALCO to the ground as well as he takes off to save his friends. As FALCO is on his way to Titantown, we transition over to the engineers as they take a ladder, or staircase, to board the boat that they just reached. This is when Magath spots Armin and Connie, and this time he actually points a gun at them, as Connie says Armin was shot in the chest and stomach. For some reason, Crunchyroll left out the stomach part, but I digress. Other than that, this part is largely the same, although I do appreciate the JoJo pose Peak does now. From here, we get our very first real vacant manga panel. In this panel, Mikasa would normally say that they need to help Annie and Reiner, and Hanji would respond by saying they can't because the train of reinforcements is coming in. In the anime though, this scene just sort of starts with her saying that the train is coming. That's not the only thing we miss out on though. We also miss the aftermath wreckage from after the train explodes, as well as Flock's subsequent lines wondering who could have done such a thing. Kind of unfortunate, but at least the explosion was kinda cool. It's from here that we move over to FALCO trying to transform with a nail he found laying around. It looks like his approach is a little different this time, as he's fully jamming it into his hand now instead of just scraping himself. This really shows that he's been at it for a while. Even more so because now we get the depiction of John flying in and discovering FALCO. FALCO seems to be a little more embarrassed about the fact that he's cutting himself because unlike the manga, he hides his wound and replies immediately to John's command as Annie's head starts to fall down in the background. In the anime though, this isn't background footage, as we can now see all the damage her face took, as well as the two arms that fly off right afterwards. I don't know how she grew that left arm of hers back so quickly, but either way, things are looking pretty grim for the two of them at this point. But never fear, because this is when Connie comes in Levi style over Annie's nape, starting some of the most heavy-duty SAKUGA this series has seen. Out of the 8 Jaegerists shown in this panel here, Connie managed to take out at least 5 of them, with finesse I honestly didn't know he had in him. Fun fact, the majority of this cut is actually done by Takashi Kojima, and for those of you who aren't familiar with that name, this is the guy that made the Rumbling opening basically single-handedly, and for the guy who made one of the best Attack on Titan openings ever, you can be sure he'd do Connie's moment justice. That being said, everything does happen pretty fast, so let's break it all down. The cut begins with us being thrust into the steam coming out of Annie as we flip around to see Connie's hooks coming out of the smoke along with the man himself. From there, he does a clockwise slash through this guy's abdomen and starts falling downwards in between 2 buildings, where he does an almost drive-by slash, flipping him around to face us as he shoots his line back upwards to reverse his speed and gain some height. Once he gets past the top of the building, he notices a guy to the left and goes in for an immediate right kick into a follow-up slash before spotting another guy whom he hook shots in the face. And that line stays in that guy all the way up to when Connie meets his final victim that he grabs with his legs to use as a human shield. This movement feels super clean, with a moderate use of squish and stretch frames that are especially noticeable on the swords, but honestly I'm impressed more by the compositional work here. Getting the background right for this cut could not have been easy. Honestly, who knew Connie was this much of a badass? At first I thought this cut cut was an exaggeration for animation's sake, but he really did take down a good deal of them in both formats. Maybe not in the same Levi style way, but I'm not complaining. I'm pretty sure the last time we saw something like this is when Levi did that same thing in season 3, hookshotting someone in the face and then using that guy as a meat shield. Ultimately though, Connie didn't actually do that last bit in the manga, so he's a little more exposed when the other soldiers start opening fire on him. But luckily that's when Mikasa and Hanji come in, or it's actually just Mikasa now, who decides to cut them up instead of kicking them. I especially love how Mikasa casually dodges a bullet from the guy she just cut up at the end. Really, these soldiers are just starting to blend together at this point, and MAPPA feels the same way, as the targets they choose kind of change depending on the version. Though of course our friends here do care that they're killing some of their own, but they know that if they hesitate then their friends will die. Except they're kind of already killing their friends. Kind of a contradiction, which is probably why this line was cut in place of Mikasa now saying that if they hesitate, they won't be able to stop the rumbling. After that is when Pieck finally joins the battle, and instead of climbing onto the roof to catch some Jaegerists flying by, she now actually digs her way out of the roof to catch some who were standing on it. Unfortunately, this means that Pieck now has to be the one to deal with some thunder spears now. They did this cut pretty smart, because half the time we don't even see the rooftops she's jumping on, but as the viewer you don't really even think about it as long as we see a few roofs here and there. This leads into a new line by Pieck fed up with the onslaught of attacks before moving into all the still cuts of everyone's fight. As you can see, compared to the manga, they chose a lot of different angles and situations for everyone, and they even included 2 extra ones here. This whole part feels really reminiscent of some episodes ago when time slowed down as Eren got his head shot off. And just like last time, this sequence leads into the moment we've all been waiting for as Falco runs in with his cut hand to the sky and transforms for the very first time. Unfortunately, the long shot that depicts this no longer shows the random soldiers on the paddle boat getting shot up, but we do now get to see Hanji's reaction to the flash of light. Now it's normally here that we'd have to wait until after Gabby's lines are done before seeing Falco's transformation in all its glory, but in the anime we get a little sneak peek of what in my opinion is the coolest Titan transformation of all time. Seeing a Titan with red Kuroko no basket eyes isn't something you see every day after all. Quite literally every time I see this cut it gives me goosebumps. And it's after Falco eats the frame whole that we cut to commercial break with another public disclosure cut screen. This one really doesn't give us any tangible info, it basically just says that humans will always have an enemy to face. Real depressing stuff, Attack on Titan. It's when we come back from commercial break that we adapt Gabby's lines to seeing Falco's transformation. Some of those lines are cut though, likely because Magath is no longer in the cut anymore. Oh, and we also get a panel of Oniokopon and the engineers shoveling coal into the boat. A panel that was actually adapted earlier when everyone made it safely to the boat. And it's now when we get some action from the best version of the Jaw Titan, hands down. His introductory attack has been changed quite a bit from the manga, and somewhat simplified a bit. While we don't get to see these soldiers get lacerated anymore, MAPPA made his appearance far more vigorous as he charges to slash the camera and send some Jaegerists into the nearest building. And one of them actually flies into the window and the spear attached to him blows up the building from the inside. These first 3 shots of the new Jaw Titan were chosen wisely, as now we get a couple of different perspectives of him right off the bat. Now that the action has started to intensify again, we're starting to get more disconnected from the manga again, with some more S-tier Sakuga cuts. Even the 2 quick cuts of Connie, Mikasa, and Hanji getting their kills is completely different. Connie and Hanji no longer stab these 2 poor souls in the back, but rather head on, and we don't even see Mikasa's sword work as the camera can barely keep up with her as the bodies are left in her wake. And that's far from the only change we have here, because normally this would be when we get the shot of Pieck initiating the fight sequence with Floch already in midair, but now Falco is being put front stage and center instead, as Floch watches the Jaw's atrocities from a nearby rooftop. This Jaw Titan is like a feral beast, and the following cuts display as much. His unstable nature is clear as day as he chucks and flings bodies around like a wild ape. I especially like this cut of his head as it quickly tilts back and forth while he screams at Floch. It's little touches like that that really make this whole appearance worthwhile. And it's that appearance that leads us into what I think is the most impressive cut this episode gave us, as Floch makes a mad dash to sink the boat. If there's one word I would use to describe this cut, it would be perspective. Its depth is in a class of its own. Every movement feels like it's right in your face, with some amazing use of foreshortening and excellently designed diminution for the characters. These 2 things combined gives this cut an extremely frantic feel and gives you a better sense of the desperation from Floch. Oh, and for those of you who aren't really familiar with these terms, foreshortening is the perception of certain body parts appearing bigger the closer you are to them, and diminution is how things in the background get smaller the further you get away from them. These are the 2 themes that really make up this cut, and Q Kawa really built upon them well. That's the person who keyed this cut. After Floch's first hook draws him closer to Falco, he puts out a reverse shot so he can navigate his way through the Jaw's claws. After he does, this is when two new hook shots come in from Hanji, who then lands and starts running after him with a smeary and bendy sword that will scrape Flock's face as he redirects it with his Thunder Spear. This knocks Hanji's blade out of the hilt and sends her off her feet as Flock goes in for a left kick. While Hanji did manage to block this kick, that leaves both her and Falco out of the game for a while as he jumps over a hump in the roof and hookshots his way under the attack of Peak, whom he's now finally reached. After he flies under her and does a cool flip, Peak reaches for him as he sends one of his Thunder Spears to her. This part had the movement decreased for a little bit for dramatic effect as the spear explodes right next to her hand. This actually knocks one of Flock's guns out of his hands as he recoils from the impact, and the Omega Lol monster emerges from the smoke. Ultimately, Peak's last-ditch effort to take him out with a bite didn't work though, as Flock somehow manages to do another flip mid-air and continues on to the ship. As for the manga, this part is really just Peak doing a nosedive before Flock is already right at the ship, so yeah, I'd say the anime has this one beat. Also, for this cut, you might have noticed that Flock had two Thunder Spears attached instead of one. That's because since he used one during this anime exclusive cut, he still needed one more to blow the boat up, and this time it's the one on his left arm and not the right. We also have one cut line here of someone saying Flock got away before we move to the scene where he tries to send out his final Thunder Spear. While this cut of Flock sending the spear in is really cool, it won't really mean much in the end, as he's shot right in the right shoulder by Gabby as the spear lands just shy of the hull. While the manga is almost comical in how the spear goes right into the open water, the anime is far more explosive as the blood-filled water rains all over Gabby and we slowly watch Flock fall into the water. It would have been nice if Gabby cocks her gun like she does in the manga to add insult to injury, but I'll take explosive bloody water any day. Good work, Gabby. Hanji also says good work, just in the manga though. This brings us into our final dose of banger SAKUGA cuts for the day, and these ones are the most savage ones for sure, as they contain Mikasa slicing and dicing her way to victory. This whole segment encompasses just 4 panels in the manga, and they don't really tell much, but the anime definitely doesn't spare the details for this part, as Mikasa mutilates people left and right. Her first kill here is basically the only one we get from the manga before Malcolm does his own thing. And Malcolm is the name of the key animator here. You can tell this guy knows his anatomy just from a simple glance. Not just for his whole characters, but his dismembered ones as well. There's a real weighty feel to every movement that goes on here. After the first slash, which more or less catches this guy in the chest and not the face, Mikasa goes on to mess up the guy shooting at her. She then hookshot slides her way to the right and does a counterclockwise flip to give an upside down X slash to this poor soul. And after some more mid-air flips, she goes on to her next more unfortunate victim, who gets one slash to the gut, another one to the arm, and a final one to the gut again. Jesus, Mikasa, I think the first one would have sufficed. Her next victim gets taken out easily enough with a simple roundhouse kick, but the guy after this won't be so lucky. I like how we can still see some of her handiwork in the background as the guy in the foreground gets closer to Mikasa. But this guy stops short when he realizes what he's dealing with, as Mikasa does a high jump and uses her gas to get some extra rotation for her next kill. I love how everything slows down for a brief second as Mikasa's smeary blade hits the camera and all we see afterwards is a decapitated head. And if that wasn't metal enough, Mikasa wraps her lines around the headless corpse and gets ready to whip them into the guy she roundhouse kicked earlier. This guy seemed to make it out the easiest with just a hardcore nosebleed, but little did he know he would be the victim of the most hardcore Mortal Kombat takedown yet, as Mikasa throws the headless corpse of the guy whose head is actually still in the air into this guy, stopping him from shooting and leaving him open to a direct stab to the gut through the decapitated corpse, blowing off his equipment and leaving him standing there together with him. Holy hell. Now, normally this would be enough, but Mikasa, as the killer she is, ignites the spears on the headless guy and retracts her lines to get some distance as the spears explode and blood comes raining down on her. This is likely an ode to the second opening of Attack on Titan that basically did the same thing. I'm pretty confident in saying that this is the most brutal kill that exists on Attack on Titan as of yet. There are a lot of close contenders, don't get me wrong, but the real savagery of these kills in particular lie in the details. From here on out, things are starting to slow down a little bit, as the ship is now fully ready to head out. And while we're starting to get back into sync with the manga again, there's still a lot of discrepancies. To start, Gabby is no longer in the shot when Oniokopon gives them the okay to head out, and the shot of all of them on the roof listening to this is completely different. See, we already saw in a previous cut the soldiers retreating, so this scene has been altered a little bit. Instead of showing John shooting them as they run away with corpses all around him, he instead comes into a cut with Hanji where she tells him that they should go before the Jaegerists come back. Good advice, but it's advice that John already knows, as he's actually the one who said these lines in the manga before Falco shows up to play. This time Falco shows up from above instead of below, destroying the roof and falling into the building as Peak tries to stop him. It seems like in the manga our crew was caught more off guard than we realize, as they really get thrown for a loop. It almost looks like Peak is protecting them from this angle, but we don't really get that depiction in the anime. Either way, it looks like they all got out of the way in time as Falco drags her through the front of the building and starts chomping on her neck. This prompts Magath to come in, who now leaps over Annie's Titan in an anime-exclusive fashion and grabs a conveniently placed sword right next to her to cut Falco out of his Titan and properly bring this battle to a close. Now they just need to get off this battlefield, so they start heading to the ship with all the Titans completely worn out from the battle. You did a good job, guys. Take a rest. You earned it. From here we get some vacant panels and cut lines from Oniokapon, who notices the weak state everyone's in as they head up to the boat. Everyone except for Magath, who decides to bring up the rear. It's then that we get a vacant manga panel of Hanji, Peak, Reiner, and John realizing that they'll probably never see this guy ever again. Although you can kind of see a blurry John in the background who likely noticed their conversation. And just like that, we're off to the mainland with the flying boat in tow. Now in the final part of the episode, Magath is making his way to the Marleyan ship that could potentially harm his comrades. It doesn't take long for him to run into trouble though, as some remaining Jaegerists spot him and open fire with their ODM gear. Except in the manga, they don't get to do any of that as Shadis takes care of them immediately on the roof. Magath doesn't even need to take cover like in the anime. Though since Shadis now takes them out in the air, he does get to step on one before making his landing. Now these two can finally team up to take out the Marleyan cruiser together. I'm not sure if that includes the other bonus ship behind it in the manga, but I'm sure it won't cause a problem. Although I will say I kinda wish they adapted these split face panels from the manga. It really shows how similar these two are. Right after that we get one final vacant manga panel of the remaining Jaegerists entering the boat while saying that they saw some people enter, as well as how they could use the boat to chase the rest of the squad. Now in the ammo supply line we get some final words between these two as they talk about their students. Regardless of all the troubles these students of theirs had to deal with, they're proud of them all the same and have grown by watching them grow. I think it was a good decision that MAPPA kept this scene pretty much strictly panel by panel. The timing and delivery works so well for it. For two men who are about to die, the dialogue of these two gives each other the comfort they need before death. They understand each other far too well, and sometimes it takes someone else to put your life in perspective for you. And once they share each other's names, the ship they're on quietly explodes, and those they left behind are only left to watch the explosion from a distance. A really sad ending for such an action-packed episode. Now there is a post-credit sequence that adapts the first 4 pages of chapter 130, but largely there really isn't much to compare here. It really just comes down to different angles and character expressions. So while I conclude this video, I'll leave you with some side-by-side shots. Overall, this episode was the best action-focused one MAPPA has yet to put out, at least in my opinion. Every season has that one episode that stands out among the rest, and so far I think this is that episode. It hit all the right beats, and honestly, with how amazing this episode was, I'm even more hyped for the final episode and whatever it might hold. If y'all are also hyped for the next episode and enjoyed my coverage of this one, consider giving the video a like and sharing it with a friend. And make sure you get subscribed for more Attack on Titan content. Well, that's it for me. As always, I hope you all have a fantastic day. This is Registry, signing off.